had some big falls before. Welcome everyone. Today we're going to talk about how you can achieve your first handstand in 2026 without having to break the bank, without having to purchase any sort of like online courses or mentorships or anything like that. So let's just get straight to it. So number one biggest question, why would anyone want to learn handstand in the first place as a normal person? Well, in this video, I would like to actually consider every single attribute that comes with being a normal person. I'm just going to instantly assume that everyone watching this is either a student that's like going to school every single day, or a person who's an employee who mostly has free time during the weekends and maybe trains only 2 to 3 times per week. So why would a generic person want to learn handstand anyway? Well, I think it's pretty cool for many reasons. For one, not that many people can do it. So obviously, if you can do a handstand, you are part of that very, very small percentile of the population that can actually do it. Number two, this is something that keeps you really, really healthy in terms of your flexibility, your joints, and also keeps you very, very fit for not so much effort. Number three, I would say the most important thing is that when you can do a handstand, this almost becomes a part of you. Like this almost becomes a part of your lifestyle now. Because obviously, if you can do a handstand, you have some affinity to the handstand in general, and you would want to continue doing this. You can always do more, you can always hold it longer, you can always do harder variations or transitions or dynamic movements or whatever. So I would say the handstands are actually a pretty cool form of training, and I don't know if you're interested in this kind of stuff, me myself not so much, but you're also going to get a lot of attention from others. You're also going to get a lot of appreciation from others, because obviously the handstand itself comes from gymnastics, a really, really beautiful and elegant exercise that not that many people are able to execute perfectly. So do I feel like this is something that's unattainable for anyone? Absolutely no. This is attainable for any person. I think one of the most important questions when learning a handstand is really how bad you want it. Like, is the handstand something that you would constantly want to do for the rest of your life, or is this just something that you want to tick off? Because if this is something that you want to tick off, I just have to assume that you're not going to have the motivation and the courage to really, really go at it. But if you are that kind of person that gets furious about not progressing, you are in the perfect place. And honestly, I have to say that this video is really the deciding point. Like, are you going to dedicate yourself for the handstand or are you not? Because obviously, if you don't dedicate yourself to it, you're just never going to learn it. Because the handstand itself is almost like a lifestyle thing. It is not really something that you're just going to fit into your training. Obviously, in terms of like how you can implement it into your workout routine, I would say that handstands should be a completely separate workout. The only thing you shouldn't do is, for example, putting a 10-minute handstand, whatever, at the end of your workout. Like, that's the worst thing you can do. The reason is because a handstand is so technical that you really cannot treat it just like a gym machine or something like this. This really doesn't work like that. A handstand involves so many joints, so many muscles, so much coordination that this would be impossible to learn within 10 minutes. So I would like to get the most important questions out of the way first. So can anyone learn a handstand? Yes, there's no excuses about it. Anyone can. How often should you train to achieve a good handstand? Well, I would say the bare minimum is 2 times per week, but if you can do all the way up to like 5-6 workouts per week for the handstand. What's a realistic time frame for learning the handstand? In my opinion and in my experience, I've seen a lot of people learn the handstand, and the people who didn't really pay a lot of attention to their trainings, who didn't record themselves doing it, they ended up suffering for multiple years, which is obviously completely unrealistic. So if you have a good program, if you record yourself, and if you really pay attention to your training, I would say in the worst case, you're going to learn it within 3 months max. Do you need any sort of like online courses or mentorship for learning the handstand? Absolutely no. Everything is on the internet already. Everything is free. You just need to apply it to your own personal training program and you're going to be able to learn it. So one of the most important things is the apparatus for learning the handstand. You have 3 different types of equipment. So number 1, you have the handstand on floor. Number 2, you have the handstand on parallels or parallel bars. And number 3, which is the most difficult out of all of them, is handstand on handstand blocks or professional canes. So I'd like to begin by saying that learning the handstand on floor is probably the most dangerous and most difficult one out of all of them, simply because you have a super extreme angle every time you want to learn a handstand. And obviously, if you don't take care of your joints, if you don't stretch properly, and if you don't warm up properly, you can get injured super easily. So realistically, I can only recommend training on parallettes. And that's because parallettes are super comfortable, especially if you have one made out of wood, especially if you have one that has like an ergonomical shaped grip. The reason that is because it's way lighter on the wrists. You are no longer exposed to this kind of extreme angle. It's not going to give you any pain. When you're doing handstand on parallel bars, your balance or micro adjustments we should say, is actually comes from the grip itself, not just like trying to break your fingers to have balance, which is a lot more comfortable, a lot easier, and you have a lot more control over it. So before beginning to discuss any sort of like exercises for the handstand, I think it would be best if I just explain the mechanics behind the handstand, because in my honest opinion, I think it's way more important than the exercises themselves. That you look at a handstand, not only yours, but anyone else's handstand, and you can just tell what goes on inside of the mechanics of the body. And obviously, me, myself, I do think this is the only way you can learn a handstand, is if you're super, super critical, even of yourself. You're not really lying to yourself that you're doing good, even if you aren't. Simply because obviously when you're doing a handstand, you cannot really see yourself. Like there's no second you watching over yourself. So there's no way you can tell if your handstand is perfect if you're just doing it. So once again, yes, anyone can learn a handstand. This is not an acceptable form of a handstand because this is really dangerous. This is what a perfect handstand looks like. There's no such thing as balance. Please forget this idea that your handstand is purely based on balance. Instead, try to think of a handstand where a person is making micro adjustments to keep themselves balanced. But there's no such thing as balance. A handstand is built up from 3 different blocks. So the first block of a handstand spans all the way from your wrists to your shoulders. The second one from your shoulders to your pelvis. And then the third one obviously is the legs. This is very important to understand because when you look at a handstand after hearing this, you're going to be able to notice that a handstand is really no more than these 3 blocks just like compensating for each other to keep the body balanced. You can see this in effect when I go from a super crappy handstand to a perfect one. Basically, all of the blocks are compensating for each other at the same time in order for me to move around and stabilize myself. So the reason it's important to understand the mechanics first is because if you don't, you're going to cause yourself a lot of injuries, a lot of pain. And obviously this is the exact same way you see a lot of people trying to learn the handstands over multiple years without having any sort of like real success. So now that we kind of understand the mechanics, I think it's really important to introduce a new terminology, which is coordination. So the reason coordination is really important because obviously when you're a beginner, a handstand is an exercise that seems super difficult and very technical. So it's very important that you actually let your nervous system get used to the coordination of coordinating multiple things at the same time. So I would say a good test to see if you're able to do a handstand is this. You have to do nothing more than just lift both of your arms from the side and raise them all the way up until it's perfectly straight, and try to adjust your pelvis. Like really try to push it forward. If you can do it and you find that it doesn't cause you any pain, not even in the shoulders, not even in the hips, you can adjust your pelvis, then there's really no excuses about it. Like you just can do a handstand, you're able to learn it. How wide should you go in a handstand? Both in bodyweight training and in artistic gymnastics, it's normally measured in forearm length. So what people normally do is they put the parallels down and they put their forearms in between. And obviously the range, I would say the acceptable range for a good handstand spans from just 1 forearm's length all the way to 1 forearm and a knuckle. But obviously this depends from person to person. Some people just prefer a wider one, some people just prefer a narrower one. It really comes down to personal preference. I would say like one of the biggest tips that helped me learn a handstand is to understand that when you're a beginner, you really cannot do a handstand. Obviously, when I say this sounds simple, but what this really means to me is when you're a beginner, you should not train the full handstand, because obviously the full handstand is the hardest variation of a handstand. You have a couple more easier progressions that you should learn first. And it's obviously simple physics, because if you have something that's super tall, it's actually really hard to balance. Whereas if you have, like tugged legs or something, this is physically shorter, it's physically easier to balance. So forget this idea that the only way you can train a handstand is if you just try it, because this is not going to get you anywhere. So in terms of the exercises, the first one you should really focus on is obviously the kick up. So what is the purpose of the kick up to begin with? The purpose of the kick up is to allow you to find your balance when you finally arrive at the straight position. So naturally, this is supposed to be a super elegant movement. This is something that's not supposed to be rushed. I would say the main way to get better at it is to lean forward a little bit with your straight arms so that you have some leeway where you can push back a little bit after. So in my personal experience, what I found to be the most useful exercise was this one, where I basically just measure my full leg's length to the wall. And basically somewhere around my lap, I like to grab the bar And the reason I do it with split legs is because obviously you want to balance yourself, you don't want to fall forward. So with one of your legs that feels more comfortable for you, the goal should be that you stop yourself. It's more important than anything to record yourself doing this because you don't want to learn a wrong kick up. Like if you can't lay down the foundations, there's no way you're going to learn a full handstand. So obviously the key here is that you get comfortable with the movement, that you can control the wrists and the shoulders at the same time. You can lock out your arms super straight. Obviously, you shouldn't want to kick up too hard. What you should do instead is really try to lock in the leaning forward kind of part. The purpose of leaning forward is that you don't have to kick up so powerfully after. After a few trainings, you're probably going to feel comfortable doing this. So obviously the next step would be to move up just a tiny bit further away from the wall where you're barely able to touch the wall with one of your split legs. And this is actually the easiest handstand variation you can learn. And this is, I would say, obviously the only one that you should go for. Because once again, if you're a beginner and you're trying to do a full handstand, you just cannot feel the balance because it's really that hard. So obviously, if you do this progression, this is going to allow you to balance the handstand a lot easier. And if you have the wall behind you, obviously it's going to prevent you from falling forward. So the second exercise that actually helped me a lot understanding the posture behind the handstand is getting really, really close to the wall, kicking up into a tuck position, and then just basically playing around, like understanding your body, understanding how the wrist functions, understanding how the shoulder functions, paying a lot of attention to the hips because you don't want to have your pelvis arching. And the reason behind this is because if you have your pelvis in an incorrect position, it is ultimately going to cause you to arch. And you don't want to have this banana arch in the handstand because, as I mentioned, it is for one, super dangerous, and for two, it is not going to help you progress any further. Once again, if you don't record yourself, you're just simply not going to understand what you're doing wrong. So obviously your number one coach should be your own phone, simply because you're recording yourself and you're going to see the flaws behind it. If you feel comfortable with this exercise and you have a lot of flexibility to begin with, you can move on to the straddle version. This is basically the same thing where you just kick up, but instead of having a tuck position, this time you're going to have a straddle position. All you're going to do is basically just adjust your body in a perfectly straight position. And when you feel like you finally found it, you can start letting the legs go. And then you can do this for reps. However, if you are someone who doesn't have the flexibility to do this, don't worry about it because all of the other exercises can help you learn handstand just as well. In my life, I have seen a case where people are not able to do even these exercises that I just mentioned. And obviously there's a quick remedy for this. The problem here is that they don't have enough scapular strength and straight arm strength to control the posture. So for you to learn to control your posture, all you really have to do is get down in a push-up position with locked out straight arms. This is really important that you keep your arms straight out locked. All you really have to do is just scapular raises. If you're trying to learn to control your posture in a handstand, you have to make sure that even doing this exercise is spot on. So if you feel comfortable doing these few exercises that I just showed you, maybe it would be the perfect time to actually start facing the wall the other way. So at first this might seem a bit difficult to do, but all you really have to do is just walk up the wall. And when you're finally up there, all you're really going to do is just try to slowly come off the wall. I would say a goal here should be that you're coming off the wall for a few seconds, at least like 2 to 3 seconds, and you're doing a few reps of that. That should really strengthen your straight arm strength. Also, you're going to start to feel your back a lot when you're doing this, and this is really, really good. And soon enough, you're going to feel really comfortable with freestanding, easier progressions of a handstand. And with that being said, the next exercise would be for you to start doing kick-ups with easier progressions. Obviously, I would say the easiest one is to just do a tuck handstand kick-up. Once again, I would like to point out that it's actually a good thing to not do a full handstand just yet, because as I said before, you have another point of contention, of balance. And you're just going to find out when you do your kick up, you still have like this one last resort of trying to fix the balance, which is obviously your legs tucked. Whereas in a full handstand, this just wouldn't be possible because obviously if you have straight legs, you're going to have a lot more leverage at the top of your handstand and you're just going to end up falling. So obviously having your legs tucked helps you a lot to understand fixing the balance on the kick up. And once again, just so you can see, I would like to show you a really, really bad handstand compared to a perfect kick up and a perfect handstand. The reason I want to make it so obvious is because it could very easily happen that you're that kind of person that just, cuts themselves a bit of slack for not doing the perfect handstand. But this is actually a really bad thing. Obviously, because if you're doing a banana handstand, all you're really doing is kind of just abusing the strength of your shoulders and kind of the joints as well, but ultimately that's just going to lead to injuries anyway. All you're really doing with this kind of handstand is you're just really putting a lot of pressure on your front delts for no reason, and also you're putting your lower back in a lot of pain that is completely unnecessary, by the way. What you should do instead is obviously record yourself, do the easier progressions first, and do everything pain-free. Also, another thing you need to learn is to fall elegantly. So I'm going to show you a few clips where I basically pretend to fall from a handstand. You need to develop this natural reaction that you're almost going into a cartwheel to exit the handstand, because the scariest thing, this is something that never really happened to me, although I had some big falls before. I have never fallen forward in a handstand. I would have to say that that's like one of the worst things. And obviously falling forward in a handstand comes from inaction, that you're not really reacting to the fall itself. So I would say a big tip here is to, every single time you start doing a handstand, start already thinking of how you would exit the handstand in case you actually do fall. So to conclude everything and to not waste anyone's time any further, I would say the only things you should focus on is this. Record yourself a lot. Forget this idea that handstand is just balance. Stop treating the handstand like it's just another exercise. Train it at least 2 to 3 times per week. Really focus on the mechanics, try to understand the coordination part. Train the progressions first, not the full handstand. Do 5 to 6 exercises in a workout. Do the hardest exercises first and then move on to the easier ones. Don't train on the floor, and be super critical of yourself when you're watching your own recordings. And most importantly, the only way you can really ascend at anything is if you're honest with yourself, you're humble, you really believe that you're not an expert yet, and you really put your mind to it. And this is how I learned the handstand myself, and this is how I'm able to do all of this. If you found this video helpful, I'm not asking for subs or anything or comments, because quite frankly, I don't really care. I don't even have a single sub anyway. All I really wanted to do with my time is to put helpful information out there. If you found this video helpful, that's already enough for me. So see you in the next one.